thank you very much for your time, and it's great to see you and be able to congratulate you personally as well.
Thank you very much.
Ian, I know it'll be recapping what you told us in the newsletter, but I wondered if you might just tell us a little bit about the past year, what it's been like for you, just a little recap for everybody.
Well, it's been very different in every possible respect. So I sat in this kitchen for pretty much the whole year. So we actually closed our office slightly ahead of the game. We could see, obviously, because we work with the health service, in and around the health service and all these hospitals in West London, we could see what was coming. And we were being told by our NHS colleagues that things were getting worse. So we closed our office pretty much from the 13th of March, so about 10 days ahead of lockdown. I went in once that following week. And then, obviously, we were officially shut from the 23rd. But since then, the office has remained shut. We've had to work remotely like everybody else. And as a chief executive, that's a challenge because you just don't feel the same connection with your staff. We've learned to cope with it. We've learned to manage. My colleagues have been amazing at keeping their teams motivated. But it's been really difficult. But at the same time, it became very apparent very quickly that as well as our local challenges, the whole national picture was going to be very difficult, but also in a strange sort of way, a real opportunity for NHS Charities to be front and centre of the response. So I became chair of NHS Charities a year ago this coming Thursday, 1st of April, 2020. I'd been on the board since the previous July. I hadn't been meant to become chair. I was going to become deputy chair, but the guy who was going to become chair went off to run an animal charity, so he couldn't. So I stepped in. And of course, within a few days, we'd launched our national appeal. We'd started getting some very generous donations. And then we had the extraordinary Captain Tom phenomenon, which, I've been in the charity or not-for-profit sector my whole career, and nobody could have predicted this. It was that coming together of a number of different factors which you couldn't have tried to put in place deliberately, and I don't think will ever be repeated. So you had the fact that everybody was at home with nothing very positive going on. You had this extraordinary older man doing this challenge. He was very telegenic. As soon as he appeared once on breakfast TV, they all wanted him back. And, people wanted to show their love and support of the NHS. He was the conduit to that. Unfortunately, we were the recipients of his funding. So it went from he's going to raise £1,000 for his local hospital, run by the hospital charity run by a friend of mine, to this is going to be national, to millions of pounds a day coming in. Yeah. And that put us very squarely on the map. So suddenly everybody knew who NHS Charities were and everybody wanted to know more about us. And so I did a lot of media stuff. We had a lot of real challenges because obviously people started asking questions. How could this two-bit organisation with 3.5 staff and a turnover of 400,000 a year suddenly cope with all this money? Yeah. But we had a very good board of chief executives, all of them very experienced. So that helped. But we also had seconded from a number of our member organisations, very experienced grant managers, and we used a fundraising consultancy and a communications consultancy. So we were able to gear up to deal with this very quickly. And we knew that the most important thing was to get the money to the front line. So we gave out grants very quickly, fixed sums initially, and then based on the number of hospital staff each charity supported. And we were able to get money into the system very rapidly. So by the end of June, we'd got something like 35 million out into the NHS UK-wide. Yes. And that was the other thing we had to cope with. We'd gone from an organisation with a couple of Scottish members and 2 or 3 Welsh to being totally UK-wide and having all these new members. So we are now in the unique position of a membership organisation, having 100% membership. Every single NHS charity that could be a member is a member. We're not flattering ourselves with because it's how marvellous we are. It's because of the money. I'm sure we're marvellous as well, but they just wanted access to the money, and that's the only way to do it. So for me, it was a it was a really challenging time. The kids were at home. I've got 2 school-age ones as well as an older one who is a teacher. And there were times it was really quite challenging. I've got a very, very good senior management team in my own charity, and they took a lot of the day-to-day burden from me, which was incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Got a good board, but also they wanted to know what's going on. They wanted to be kept in touch. I'd say the period from the end of March till about the end of July was one of the busiest I've ever had, and I've worked in some high-pressure jobs. And since then, like everybody, it's had its ups and downs. I think we are, touch wood, coming out of the worst of it now. The hospitals are much quieter. The money's still coming in. People are still giving. Corporates, individuals, we're still fundraising. And the next big focus is on the mental health of NHS staff. That's a real worry. And that's our next big campaign launching after Easter.
And for you personally, to be awarded an OBE in the New Year's Honours List must have been an incredible tribute, I think, to your commitment.
It was very, very welcome, particularly at the time. I mean, it was, so they write to you to check you're going to accept it.
Okay.
It's all very hush-hush. And it used to come in a registered letter, but now, of course, it comes by email. And I nearly missed the email because it didn't look particularly significant. And then I noticed that the attachment said Ian Lush OBE. So I thought I better open this. And it's been lovely. I've heard from people who I haven't been in touch with for years, and also people who, I've worked with for many, many years. And I even heard from some old Alfredians, which was really nice. I mean, there's one or two I'm still very close to. So that was really nice.
So we talked a little bit about that. And I was interested to see that you played the violin for the Snow Queen.
Yeah, I did. So, when I was a pupil at King Alfred's, music was my big thing. So I played the violin, and then I changed to the viola when I was about 13. And I mean, KAS and music has had an up and down, classical music anyway, has had an up and down relationship. But we had a good enough orchestra. 3 of us, I think, did music A level in my year. And we put together concerts. And it was a great, experience. But also being from Northwest London, you're surrounded by brilliant musicians. And I learned with the wonderful teacher, Sheila Nelson, who died about a few months ago, who was an extraordinary producer of great string players and also great string teachers. And her sort of methodology became adopted by most of the sort of string teaching world in England. So it was, music was the thing. So I went on to do music at university. And then I played professionally for 3 years. So I did use it. I went first of all to Iceland, of all places, to play in the orchestra and the opera company there. And then I came back and I played in Liverpool Phil for a couple of years. And I could still be there now. I was on a permanent contract. But, I've never regretted doing it, and I've never regretted stopping doing it. I was a perfectly good viola player. Obviously, if I hadn't been, I wouldn't have been able to play professionally. But I wasn't dedicated enough to the simple act of playing the viola for it to be enough for me. Sitting in the middle of an orchestral section, I found it quite, in a strange sort of way, it's a quite de-skilling, or almost it's almost makes you slightly childlike in the way you go about your daily life, because you're sitting as a string player, particularly in a big orchestra, you're sitting in the middle of a section. So unless you're the principal, you sit there and you do essentially what everybody else has to do. You have to play in the same part of the bow. You are very much part of a big machine, and it's thrilling in its own way, but you have almost zero individuality. And I wasn't built for this. King Alfred's had equipped me with lots of things, but sitting as part of a viola section wasn't one of them. Because, KAS still now, as it has done for over 100 years, wants every child to be an individual. That's its ethos. And it's incredibly good at promoting that. And actually being an orchestral string player, you're taught not to be an individual. It's a bit like being in the army in a strange sort of way. You follow your section principal, you follow the leader, you follow the conductor. You have rules about when you walk on and off stage. And if you go on a tour or something like that, I don't, it may have changed, but I don't think so. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, is a fantastic viola player. He's much better than I ever was. And he still says the same thing. You go on a tour in better times and they take your passport away from you and everything's done for you. So it is that quite sort of infantilizing profession. And I realized around the time of a sort of Viennese night in Wolverhampton, Johann Strauss's music is not particularly rewarding for viola players. I sat there thinking, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And being pretty sure I didn't. So I resigned at the same time as I got married to my first wife. Great, good career move. And decided to try to go into arts management. So I did the City University's course, which I think still exists in arts management. Unfortunately, got a job pretty quickly and then worked in arts management from 1986 until 2003. So it was a good move.
Yes.
And as I say, I've never regretted stopping playing, but I'm always glad that I did, because if I hadn't, I probably would have gone through my life thinking, should I have played the viola professionally?
So Ian, you mentioned a little about being in the sixth form and how people might have viewed you. What were you like as a student at King Alfred?
I was quite serious, I think, looking back. 64 to 78, I was there. So mainly with Nicky Archer as the head. This is the 60s and 70s. There wasn't a huge amount of pressure on you to do your homework, but I always did. And I was quite a serious child. And I probably worked relatively hard particularly in the sixth form. I was very determined. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into music, but I didn't want to go to music college. I wanted to go to a university, and I really wanted to go to York because it was quite a far out place in 70s vernacular. Had a very, very eclectic course, and it's a lovely place. And I'd never lived anywhere further north than West Hampstead. So about time for a change. And so I did work quite hard. I mean, I think, and the other thing, funnily enough, I got from particularly the senior school at King Alfred's was I loved being on committees. And so I was on council, I was on any committee that was going, and I have spent my life volunteering for pretty much every possible type of organization where you can join a committee. And as Anna, my daughter, would say, what is it about you and Peter, my older brother, who was also his whole school life at King Alfred's, 6 years older than me. He won't thank me for telling you that. He said, what is it about you and Peter that you can't join something and then not end up running it? So this was particularly when I became lead governor at Great Ormond Street. He said, could you not have just stayed as an ordinary governor rather than, become lead governor? I think my youngest was 2.5. She said, did you really need this in your life? I said, but it will be a great experience. And to be honest, without that, I probably wouldn't have got this job. So looking back, everything has a purpose. But yeah, I liked all the democracy in King Alfred's. And my dad was on council. He was the school architect, obviously, which you know.
Yes.
And he was on council throughout his time pretty much as a parent, certainly from when I was in senior school. And so they were very involved with the school. And I really admired that opportunity to be involved. And so actually pretty much until, with the exception of my children's own schools, where there have been plenty of other people who I haven't got involved, I have always thought, I could do something to help here if I have the time. And even if you don't have the time, you can find time. So yeah, I'm a bit of a committee person. And I think a lot of that goes back to that ethos of join in. Yeah, your contribution will be valued, no matter whether you're a 6-year-old with who wants to talk about the playground, or a 17-year-old who wants to report about gender issues.
Yes.
There are all those. I mean, I must say, so my middle child, who's 14, coming up 15, is in year 10 at Alexandra Park School, APS, up the road. And it's a very good school. I mean, it's halfway between Alexandra Park and Muswell Hill and here in Bounds Green, and has a very good catchment. And whenever I go to things before COVID, I'm very impressed with their ethos too, because I think in a funny sort of way, the progressive movement has had a very strong impact on schools, particularly in London, but I suspect outside as well, because it's funny how much I look at the experience of a lot of the children I know now, and it's not that dissimilar from King Alfred's. Whereas when I was at school, there was a huge difference between most schools and KAS. We were definitely outliers.
Yes.
In a way I suspect is slightly less true now.
Yes, because the ethos that our founders held dear and protected all those years have become in many ways mainstream. Things like outdoor education and some of that agency that pupils now feel within schools. I think you're right.
Well, coming from a fairly middle-class North London Jewish background, most of my friends were at other fee-paying schools. Mm-hmm. So they were at UCS or South Hampstead, a few at North London, Haberdash is where my daughter went. And the main thing you noticed, other than, of course, that they all wore uniform, was the rigidity of their school experience compared to ours. There was always a fluidity about King Alfred's, whether in the curriculum or just the way people behaved. But largely, people didn't take advantage of that. Yeah, we might not have done as much homework, or at the time, the people didn't obsess about results quite as much. But the results, probably the A-level results, weren't as good as UCS or South Hampstead. But that wasn't what the school was about. Mm. And I certainly noticed that there was this kind of emphasis on discipline rather than self-discipline was quite apparent. And so, yeah, I was very aware of that. But I suppose, I knew kids who were at William Ellis and other non-fee paying schools. But again, they were all in North London. They all had similar catchments. We were aware, I suppose, of the liberal with a small L approach that King Alfred's took to education, the fact that we were very much encouraged to think for ourselves, and the fact that we could think round subjects as well as just learning the curriculum. And I had some amazing teachers. Mm-hmm. And the one that everybody of my era always mentions is Margaret Maxwell.
Yes.
She could have been lecturing at Cambridge or Oxford, and I think she even had been offered jobs there. But she loved her subject. She loved the school. And it was a really close thing between me doing music or music and English at York because of Margaret. And to be honest, although I got A's in both, because she was also the exams tutor, she slightly surreptitiously slipped me the paper grades, the little handwritten note, which I still have, when I got my results by post in those days. Terrifying moment. Your parents could have pretending not to watch while you open the envelope. When I got my results, my paper grades for English, I got the top grade in every paper. And that's because of Margaret. I loved English, but she was a fantastic teacher because she taught around our set works. Mm. So we didn't just do Richard II. We looked at everything that went before and after Richard II. And the same when we did Henry V for O-level, as it was then, we started with all the stuff about Hal and Falstaff. We didn't go straight in. And I can remember huge chunks of my A-level set works because she imbued in us such passion for the literature. Yeah. And so when I stayed on at York after my BA to do an MA, and my main thesis was on an opera by the then contemporary composer Sir Michael Tippett. And what I actually wrote about was the language, not the music. Mm. And it was really because of that training that I had doing A-level English that I could write about where he'd got his wrote his own libretti, where he'd got his source material from, and I could examine it in that way that she taught us. So she was a huge influence. And Hilary, who taught O-level history, Naomi Hull, who also taught us English, and my music teachers. So I had, I can't remember his surname, Carrick, somebody, for O-level, but then he left and two teachers came in, James Drew Edwards and Anne Elliott for A-level, and they were great. James was really cool. He was about 23, and we thought he was amazing. And he was a kind of jazz and rock musician as well as a classical composer. I've kept in touch with him a bit, still composers. And Anne was just very thorough. And they also spotted in me a slight tendency towards thinking I knew it all, because I did, because I was 16 and, very talented and the best musician in the school, which after I have to say Richard Lester and Jonathan Kahn had left because they were amazing. But, so I thought I knew it all, and they recognized this, and they managed through one very carefully written report at the end of, I think, lower 6 to kind of remind me of this and bring me down a peg or 3. And that was a very good moment. I've had that happen a couple of times, maybe 3 times in my career. And you can either be deeply resentful and bitter, or you can learn from it. Yeah, they were great. It was a very positive experience for the whole 14 years. And there were a whole number of us who started school at the age of 4 and were still together at the age of 18, probably half a dozen who went through the whole 14 years. And that says a lot.
Tell me a little bit about what it meant to go through from the time that you started the school all the way through to the end of sixth form.
I mean, in a way, you've grown up with these people and you've grown up with some of the teachers, and they've seen you from that very nervous 4-year-old coming into reception and going up to the sixth form. And so there's this sense of belonging. The only time I ever contemplated moving was for the sixth form, possibly going to a music school, to the Purcell School, where one of my best friends, who remains one of my best friends, was and was really enjoying it. But actually, had I been wanting to just be a performer, that's what I would have done. But because I knew I wanted to do academic music, I actually thought it was better to stay on at King Alfred, so I'm glad I did. I think you just had that complete sense of being part of a family. And of course, with Dad being the architect and everybody knowing and loving him, that really helped.
Yes.
And seeing the buildings that he and his partner had designed, Alfred Lester had designed, seeing the difference they had made to the school over that era, that made you hugely proud as well. So you were very much part of this big family. And it wasn't even that large. I mean, at the time, it was 2 forms of 20 people, 20 students. So it was actually tiny. I got to York and I thought that was big, and York's 3 times bigger now. My son's school is a 7-form entry. So 210 pupils come into APS every year. It's massive. I mean, it's as big as York University was when I went there. So King Alfred's was completely different. You knew everybody, and that was great. You felt very much part of it. Some people left because they found that too much and they wanted a fresh start. And I can understand that, but it was absolutely right for me.
That's amazing. What would you say are some of the sort of the values that you've taken from your time at King Alfred?
I think the main one is this sense of looking out for other people. We were very much not even taught, it was just there. Life was not just about getting on and being successful and trying to make as much money as possible. It was very much about wanting to make a difference, whether it was being on school council or whether there was a lot of charity work done by the school and its pupils at the time when it wasn't, every school does that now, but it wasn't particularly fashionable at the time. And it wasn't done out of any sense of obligation. It's because people wanted to do it. So I've never wanted to do a job just because I thought I could make lots of money or make other people lots of money. And I think that, again, comes back to that set of values that are kind of embedded in you through being in an organization like that, being in a school where everyone seemed to have those values. Or if they didn't, to be honest, they probably didn't stay. But it goes back to my parents as well. We definitely had those values at home as well. But it was school certainly was a big part of that. Just that feeling that you should be trying to make a difference. You should be thinking about other people. It wasn't just about you.
And do you have a sense of the reason why your mum and dad chose King Alfred for you and Peter?
Yeah, well, Dad privately published a set of memoirs. My brother runs a small publishing company, among many other things, and publishing mainly sports books. But he printed a set of memoirs for Dad with some amazing photos, mainly about his war years. But he came back from the war having already had pretty liberal values with what he'd seen and what he heard as a Jewish boy from North London, and then hearing from his family and others, and a lot of his cousins and others were wiped out in the Holocaust. So that gave him some very strong views. And he and Mum were very liberal. So when Peter was coming up to school age, which would be the late 50s, they were looking round at schools, and they very quickly lit upon King Alfred's as somewhere which they felt they could commit to. And between us, we were there for 20 years. So they really did commit to it. And obviously he spent quite a while as the school architect. So it was, I think they could see from what when they went to visit, they could see that it would nurture the children in a way that was important to mum as a child psychotherapist, having trained with the likes of Bion and Winnicott and people who very much valued that child-centered approach.
Yes.
But also for Dad, with his quite radical views in some way, this ethos that they were, they wouldn't try to instill views in the child, they would try to let the child find their own way. And so that was important to them as well.
That's amazing. It really is. And Ian, tell me about I know that you and Peter are so good about keeping in touch with your friends. And you mentioned 6 people who went all the way through. Do you remember their names and who they are? Are you still in touch?
Well, there's one I'm still very much in touch with, and that's Simon Kossoff.
Yes.
So I think, is Jessica Leaney quite young?
Jessica is Ruth's daughter.
Yeah, so that's his niece.
Yes.
So obviously, I'm still in touch with Simon, and I hear about Daniel and Ruth through Simon.
Yes.
So Simon and I, pre-pandemic, would meet for lunch a couple of times a year, and we have a lunch date booked for when we're able to.
Yeah.
Judy Lipson was also one of the ones who went from start to finish, and I haven't seen her for 2 or 3 years now, but I'm still in touch with Judy. Other than that, I mean, the other people who I think did the whole way through, so there was Tessa Sullivan. I think she stayed pretty much to A levels. A chap called David Chivers.
Yes.
I think he was there from the start. I think the others, they were certainly the main ones, because there were others who kind of came along later, and then a few who left before sixth form. Certainly those 4, but there were others, but I can't remember so many names. The year above me, again, I think who was there the whole time, and I'm not in touch with him, but I see his name mentioned occasionally. It was Albert Finney's son, Simon Finney.
Yes. Yeah.
Who was, of course, a very good actor, but I don't think went on to act much. But he was a long-standing pupil. I'm not sure he did the whole. And Jake Auerbach, who was also a year or 2 above me, but he was a very long-standing pupil.
Yeah. Was there a favorite spot at King Alfred, a favorite place of yours?
Yes, I mean, 2. So I played a lot of tennis. I still do. So I love the tennis courts, and pretty much from sort of March through to October, I'd spend most breaks and lunchtimes playing tennis. But the other one has to be Squirrel Hall, because Dad led the kind of project to rebuild it. And if you look at the obituaries of him when he died in 2011, there was a lot of stuff about Squirrel Hall. People then still remembering being part of those parties, lugging the enormous telegraph poles. And also it was, I was probably 12, 13 at the time of that rebuilding. It was, so that was another favorite spot. I'm very fond of Squirrel Hall and what it represented. It represented both the fact that, we could have these meetings outdoors, kind of half undercover, but also the fact that it was the collective labor of pupils, parents, staff, everybody getting involved, having a great time under Dad's direction. So, using his army experience of making temporary shelters out of whatever you could find. And it meant a lot. And whenever I haven't been back for quite a while now, but, I'd always go and see what kind of condition it was in, sometimes better than others. But that was very representative of what the school was about. Yeah, I mean, that was one of my main memories, is how much time you spent outdoors. And, every lunchtime and every break time, you'd be outside for one reason or another, playing basketball or playing tennis, or in junior school, sort of exploring. And you had lessons outside and call-overs. And it felt like being in a proper outdoor space, even though you're in this suburban area. And that was really important.
Yes. No, it's really special. I know that Kim Franklin always talks about organizing a reunion where we play tennis. So some of the early 70s. So now that we've got our new AstroTurf surface, we'll have to organize something like that.
I'd be very up for that. I found, to my immense embarrassment, a diary. I was in what used to be called 4th year. So this would have been the same year as my son now, year 10. And one of my proudest achievements that year was that with a boy called Peter Phillips, who was an exceptionally good tennis player, we won the doubles in the school tournament.
Fantastic.
And in fact, according to my diary, probably because the sixth formers couldn't be bothered, the fourth years won every tournament in the tennis that year. We did have some very good players. So one of them went on to be a professional, actually, a boy called Fraser. So Fraser was in my form, and he and I used to play a lot together, and he was very good. I had no idea he'd actually gone on to play professionally until I read that update in the old Alfredian. But I mean, he had the advantage of living in a fairly kind of nondescript house in Temple Fortune with a tennis court in the back garden. The back garden basically was a tennis court because his dad was obsessed with tennis. So we used to go there and play quite a bit. But yeah, so we did win the doubles that year, which is very nice.
It's wonderful. It's something that you learnt at school and has carried on all the way through. It's tremendous.
Yeah, no, it was very important.
Ian, thank you so much. I'm conscious of having monopolised your time this afternoon, and we're really grateful for you giving up your time to talk to us a little bit more. We're very thankful for your time and for sharing your memories at King Alfred.
It's been a real pleasure, so thank you for asking me, and I'll look forward to seeing mine and all the others.